What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another Hallmark mailbag. Before we cannonball in, the four usual reminders. Subscribe to us, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all three. Those help us out the most. Hit sub on YouTube as we continue to try to grow that. Comment, like, help the algorithm love us back. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast description. Follow us on all the social handles. Those are in the podcast and YouTube descriptions as well. And if you've done all those things, consider telling people about us. Shout outs on Twitter, word of mouth recommendations. They all go a long way. With all of that said, though, let's get into this mailbag. I have a lot of questions. I'm going to try and get through. I'd like to get through all of them, but we know how wordy I can be, and we got a ton. I'm always very overwhelmed by how great our Discord users are with the questions. And so this first one comes from, and actually Twitter. I have one Twitter mailbag question from this time. I don't know why I'm saying solicitation. I had a question on Twitter that I will answer here. Comes from unbiased Rockets fans. Kings, no defense, great offense, is a lot like people describe the Mavs post Kyrie trade. So why aren't the Mavs like the Kings now? Why so much worse? Lots of quote value judgments. Oh my God. No analysis of what is happening on the floor. Good O, bad D. Why are the Mavs not like the Kings? I don't really know about the understand the value judgment part of this, but I will say, what's happening with the Mavs right now, it's not really just about the post Kyrie trade. This was kind of their identity before the Kyrie Irving trade, and getting rid of your best perimeter defender and then just someone who's a bigger guard in Spencer Dinwiddie. I do think that exacerbated some of your issues. And now you're left also post Maxi Kleba injury and his return, trying to just scramble and figure out the center rotation. Should we play JaVale McGee? Christian Wood's clearly not long for this team. Maxi Kleba has not looked great following his return from that hamstring surgery. And what separates them from the Kings, just aside from the vibes, is I think Sacramento is going to play a lot faster, including on the defensive end. Like, I feel like there's more, I don't want to say effort there. And the other thing to note here is that the Mavs low lights are probably lower than the Kings is when you look at just some of their really bad transition defensive sets. They are not the worst transition defense in the league, but when you have Luka Doncic on the court with Kyrie Irving, especially, those numbers have not been great in transition defense. And that just paints a really bleak picture of the Mavs. But the Kings, they scramble a lot faster on defense. They are one of the best in the league at forcing opponents deep into the shot clock. I think that their opponents have like the fourth longest possessions in the NBA, average offensive possession time. And it is not translated to an efficient defense. So like we can't, the Kings are hovering around the bottom 5 in points allowed per possession, but there's kind of just like a blueprint and an energy there where that's felt way off with the Mavs all year. And then again, go back and look at some of their low lights or some of their best lineups just being so poor at getting back in transition. The other thing with the Kings is, and this is especially true when looking at them versus the Mavs post Kyrie Irving trade, they're better at gobbling up the low-hanging fruit. They grab defensive rebounds. They're limiting second chance opportunities. They're not fouling a ton. And like Dallas is not doing good in either of those areas right now. And when you also struggle on offense at times, whether it's in crunch time, and the Mavs offense has been fine with Kyrie and Luka on the court, but when you struggle, like during the Doncic and no Kyrie minutes, if you can't get your defense set because you're missing shots or your offensive possessions aren't ending well, that's going to harm your defense too. And, we can look at the margins. The Mavs have lost a lot of close games this year. The Kings, we know, have been, De'Aaron Fox specifically, has been really good in the clutch. But I think that the Mavs are not being unfairly judged here, and their setup is demonstrably worse than the Kings this season because they're not built, especially now, to gobble up that low-hanging fruit. And this is all, again, you can look, and statistically, the Mavs defense has not been as bad as the Kings this year, but there are elements you look at in the Kings defense where I don't want to say they've overachieved relative to their personnel, but it's okay, they're at least doing this. And with Dallas, it's very much, it doesn't feel that way. It hasn't for a lot of the season, but especially since the Kyrie Irving trade and the loss of Dorian Finney-Smith, and as they've gone through an even what feels like a greater existential crisis on their front line. Another Mavericks question here, which I think I'll have to make the hook for this podcast because it's so spicy. Alex John Alvarez asks, it's been speculated that the Mavs have been keeping an eye on Luka's ability to lead and play with Kyrie post-trade deadline. Between his body language, the losing record, missing the playoffs, is it ridiculous to think the Mavs could trade Luka and keep the other star they have in the building in Kyrie before letting Kyrie walk for nothing after trading so much to get him? I lean towards no way in hell do they trade Luka, but their lack of assets makes this situation very interesting for the future. So I would give it I guess I should never say never, but it would be like a 0.000001 chance that Kyrie Irving is kept over Luka Doncic before next season. And the thing to remember here, too, is that as bad as things look in Dallas right now, and as bad as you might feel about their future, they have control over Luka Doncic for a few more years. You start to worry probably 2 years before he hits free agency, because that might, the year there's the player option year, and then there's that season before the player option year. Leading into that season, that's when Luka might be most likely request a trade, or when you have to think, okay, do we risk? He's the type of player where I would argue that if you think you have a chance of keeping him, you go a la LeBron James, a la Kevin Durant, and you play it out to keep him. And so that's why I could see, hey, where with other guys, you might just look at trading them if they didn't ask for out. But with Luka, I look at it as, okay, you have 3 years left before he hits free agency in 2026 as his player option. That's your timeline. So you don't get rid of him unless he asks for out. And that might be the question here is, will he ask for out? I would be surprised if that happened over the summer. The other issue here is what does happen with Kyrie Irving. Let's assume that. And so the leadership stuff, Luka hinted at that he's going through some off-court personal stuff. Hopefully that's, you never want to see players dealing with any of that. So hopefully he's fine. He's mentioned that his defense has been poor, but that also he's been playing basketball for like 3 years straight. That's just like, he's being too honest. Like you could just say at that point, I don't know. Hopefully everything's fine with him off the court. And there was the report where Tim Hardaway Sr. was talking about how Luka and Kyrie weren't leaders. Tim Hardaway Jr. very thoroughly rebuked that. And so I'm not too worried about Luka's leadership or even Kyrie's leadership. I worry about all things Kyrie Irving, but he's not, what's ailing the Mavs right now. And Tim Hardaway Jr. was talking about Kyrie in glowing terms with how well he's done with rallying guys together for text messages and checking in on everyone. Maybe Luka's not perfect at that just yet. But with that being said, Luka's still really super young and has time to learn how to do that. And so when he's like in year 7, 8, 9, he could be more of a vocal leader if he's not already. And so I don't think this is a situation where if you're the Mavs, you look at moving him and just build around Kyrie. There's not it. That would be a terrible move. You'd get a haul for Luka Doncic and something that you could, relaunch or rebuild with, but you're certainly not going to do that and then keep Kyrie Irving. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I think I don't want to say the Mavs assets are underrated, but this season, they're either going to have this year's lottery pick and then another future first they could trade, or they will have, let's say they make the playoffs, which doesn't seem too likely at this point. They will have 2 future first round picks then to move. And so in essence, they still do have 2 first round picks they can move. It's just that I know a lot of people think they should just tank and eased into the lottery because of Wembanyama, and maybe or just getting into the top 4. Maybe there's merit to that, but I think teams, in all likelihood, if they're going to wind up with the 11th pick or something, teams are going to prefer a distant Mavs first round pick or another first round pick over just getting that 11th pick this year. And if you wind up the 11th pick, you can only trade 1 future first because of the way that you traded your pick in 2029 to Brooklyn. And so you could go, you would trade this year, technically 2023, and then you could trade one, and it could be your 2024. It could be your 2025 and 2027, I guess, at that point. But no, the problem here, what becomes the problem there is you still owe that obligation to the Knicks. That spills over to 2024 if you keep your own pick. And so then the soonest you could trade your pick is 2026 at that point. And then because you owe the 2029 pick, the maximum that you can trade if you keep your own draft pick is 1 additional first round pick this year, which is why for me, if I'm the Mavericks, I'm better off setting that pick to New York now, and then you can trade 2 future firsts, which just retain that mystery box appeal because we don't know where they're going to land just yet. They have some salaries that they can move to match stuff. I've already talked about this where Jaden Hardy, Josh Green, they're not blue chip prospects, but those are guys that will have some value on the trade market. Do I think they have the best offer for Mikal Bridges? No. Do they have a better or competitive offer for OG Anunoby? Maybe. If 2 firsts are on the table, plus, those young guys and then just matching money, they can still go that route. And so it's definitely time for urgency in Dallas, but you have to, before you even look at moving Luka, whether he asks for it or not, you have to, 1, figure out the Kyrie Irving stuff. And then from there, you still need to take the other swing because Luka is a generational talent, regardless of how you feel about him. I know a lot of people think he's overrated. it's just too early to tell that. The season has been a mega disappointment. The Mavs are one of the most disappointing teams in the league, if not the biggest disappointment in the league. But they still have options on their table. And I don't think there's a scenario in which, unless Luka really pushes for out, because let's say Kyrie Irving left and he thinks the future is bleak. And even then, again, having him under contract for 3 more years before free agency, I think the Mavs do their damnedest to sort of figure it out. And you have to take that next home run swing, whether Kyrie Irving stays or not. And I look, at this point, I would bet on Kyrie Irving staying. The money and the bird rights are clearly important to him. That's why he asked for out in Brooklyn. And for all the shit that's going on with the Mavs, it hasn't seemed like there are these fissures in the locker room, at least. And so I'm not, a big believer in Kyrie Irving culture setter, but it does seem like the Mavs like what he has brought to the table from that dynamic. And look, if you get to go through a training camp and an offseason with Kyrie and Luka together, they're going to have better chemistry late in games, and that should help their crunch time offense. And I will just reiterate, I'm not defending the Mavs here. They suck. In the Mark Cuban comments on Jalen Brunson and Rick Brunson, blaming the parents for getting involved in Jalen Brunson's free agency. Look, really quickly on that, even if that information has been misportrayed about how many times Jalen Brunson was willing to sign the 4-year, $56 million extension, you have nothing to gain by whipping out your phone and reading a text message from an agent about contracts and clients. There's just, you could lightly refute it and be like, well, I think some of the stuff is, misrepresented, but hey, we fucked up. And he did say that he misses Brunson, but we fucked up. We should have given him the extension at the first chance that we could have, which they would not have offered it. We know that for a fact. It was offered at least once, and just move on. So that's just fucking dumbass behavior there, quite frankly. But again, where's my actual train of thought on this now? That's awkward. But look, with Kyrie and Luka, they've played a lot of close games. They're still winning the minutes with those two on the court. I think that there is at least a pathway to them being a lot better. And I would be more panicked if they keep Kyrie, they make some moves on the margins, just get better centers, which you can do on a budget. And then you have to make the trade. They should be trading this year's pick if they keep it. They should be trading a future first round pick or two over the offseason to bring in real talent. You have to make another move like that. And if we're sitting here, not this time next year, but leading into the trade deadline next year, and the Mavs are kind of ass and the Kyrie and Luka stuff isn't working out, then you start to ask yourself more existential questions about, well, not just where are we headed, but how much is Luka a part of the struggle? Because right now, I just don't think your defense, he is part of the problem. Your offense, I guess he's part of the problem when he doesn't have the ball. The same way Kyrie's part of the problem when he's standing in the corner. Isn't that kind of on the coach, though, to some extent right now? Again, let's see them go through a training camp before they become these stationary off-ball bystanders to play off one another, because you don't want to go through hasn't always been your turn, my turn stuff in Dallas. And again, it's been effective at points what they're doing. It has not been inventive at all. Is that a symptom of this happened midseason, or does Jason Kidd just not the right head coach for this team? Time will tell. And so that's just kind of a cop-out answer here, but I would be shocked if the Mavs entertain any sort of Luka Doncic trades, even if he asks for out, which again, I do not expect him to do this offseason specifically. Next question, Rome 8180. And let's be clear, Rome did not want me to include this question on the podcast, but I actually thought it was a fascinating question, so I'm including it anyway. And maybe I shouldn't because we have such a backlog. Speaking of this, that brings me to a question inspired by your pod. Would you include Trey Murphy in a trade for Jaylen Brown? I wouldn't. Is that just a Homer fan thing? I would 100% include him in a trade for Luka, though. Bear in mind, I'm higher on Trey Murphy than anyone on the Pelicans besides hypothetical Zion. This is interesting. And so what I do think factors into the equation is that Jaylen Brown's still young, age 26. Murphy's about to turn 23. So he's less than Jaylen Brown will turn 27 before next season, but they're less than 4 years apart. Brown's going into a different contract spectrum, though. You have Trey Murphy, 2 more years left on his rookie scale, and then you get the second contract is always team friendly, even if it's the max, just because of the percentage that it is of the salary cap. For the most part, it's always team friendly. So you have to factor that into this. And then you're not trading for Jaylen Brown unless you think he's going to resign because he hits free agency in 2024, or he can maybe sign his extension. Either way, you're looking at paying him $40+ million after the 23-24 campaign. So heading into 24-25. Would you to not move Trey Murphy for him, though? I think would probably be a mistake. It depends on what else needs to be in the offers. And when you're looking at a team like the Celtics, it probably wouldn't be draft pick heavy, because if you move Brown, you're still going to be trying to win around Jason Tatum. So you would look at Trey Murphy as, okay, well, that dude comes in and plays immediately. The Pelicans would miss his 3-point volume, his just movement off the ball, even giving them some rim pressure away from the ball, on the ball. He's shooting 55+% on drives. over like, I don't know, basically half the season at this point. Not high volume of drives, but he's been getting better at attacking in open space. And the way he can move in open space, get off shots quickly, or like I said, get going towards the basket, gives you a lot of defensive length and disruption. I get that there's still the mystery box appeal, though, but if you're not going to trade him for Jaylen Brown, who is going to be in the All-NBA discussion this year, I don't know if he makes it. I would frame it this way. If there was a fourth All-NBA team, I think Jaylen Brown would make it. I guess a lot of it depends on what do people do with the Kyrie, KD, LeBron James stuff and the playing time. I'm not going to say it would be foolish. I understand the hesitance, but and also knowing, okay, well, is Zion going to be healthy? But just in a vacuum, I would move Trey Murphy for Jaylen Brown, because we've seen that. I don't know if, and again, you have to bank on development here. I don't know if Trey Murphy can ever become sort of the slow it down. I'll run some things in the half court, or I'll get to my spots and knock down these pull up Jays in the half court in a higher volume, like Jaylen Brown has proven that he can do. And where a lot of stuff Trey Murphy does is still predicated on not being teed up, but also just moving and not having, like, needing that sort of, I'll call it the off ball head start. Jaylen Brown no longer really needs that. He can get the head of steam going from on the ball. He's not the perfect player. Maybe you want to argue that Trey Murphy will end up being the better passer. I do think Jaylen Brown has made incremental improvements there over the years. I also think that, right now, Jaylen Brown is going to be better defensively than Trey Murphy. I think a lot of what goes on in Boston, that everyone kind of insulates each other. But aside from Derek White this year, just given how limited, Robert Williams III has been, could you make a case that Jaylen Brown's been better than Marcus Smart on defense? I mean, maybe. I think that there's more to the positional spectrum than him. So again, if Jaylen Brown says, I will stay in New Orleans, and it does depend on the rest of the package, but if that's the centerpiece asset, where you're either giving up salary fodder and maybe a very protected first, or just someone else. You're not giving up Dyson Daniels and Trey Murphy, and then also Herb Jones and picks. If it's just Trey Murphy is the centerpiece of this package, sort of like the Mikal. No, there's a lot of picks included in the Kevin Durant trade. What am I thinking, man? I'm trying to think of what would be a good analogy for that type of package. But if it's Trey Murphy and just odds and ends to get Jaylen Brown because he's in the last year of his deal, I'm probably doing it if I'm the Pelicans, assuming I have a good feel for what he wants to do in New Orleans long term. I do think it's arguable, depending on how you feel about the Pelicans' direction, Zion's health, all that jazz. This next question comes from Pito. Which NBA team is underlooked in terms of urgency to make a big move to satisfy their top players? Otherwise, they could leave. This is always an interesting question, and it's an offseason one for sure. I think Pito mentions that the Mavericks are certainly one with Luka. I think, yeah, you just need to, they already made the Kyrie trade, but there needs to be another one there. Other teams, I think people around the league do believe Atlanta's kind of on the clock with Trey Young. We'll see if they make any big moves over the summer, or if having Quinn Snyder in there ends up being huge. I would say Washington is on the clock with Bradley Beal. He has that no trade clause and another 4 years left on his deal, but he has already stated that he doesn't really want to go through a rebuild. Portland with Damian Lillard is probably the biggest one. I don't want to make the discourse about that, but he did say he doesn't want to go through a rebuild. I respect that he doesn't define his legacy by championships. I don't think we should, to be honest. And so if he wants to stay in Portland, I respect that. But I do think, as the Blazers, unless they tell him this is what we're doing, do you still want to stay here? And he says yes, you are obligated to try. He's coming off the best season of his career, and you did fuck shit at the trade deadline, quite frankly. And you need to stop hitting these singles and doubles and go for the triples and home runs. And so I think he's the big one. If we were looking for sort of just like an off the beaten path, this is just like, okay, well, what has he accomplished? He's extension eligible this summer. And just like, what is going on in Charlotte? You're on the clock with LaMelo Ball, quite frankly. He will sign the extension, but is he going to set the record for like the quickest attempt to get out of there if they don't really turn things around? I'm not saying he hates Charlotte, but you look at the direction of that team and you're like, okay, they have another top lottery pick coming this year, so maybe that's good. Steve Clifford has definitely installed a defensive identity. A lot of that's come without LaMelo Ball in the lineup. That's a situation I would be monitoring. Quite frankly, depending on how Minnesota's season ends, I know that they've already made like the big move and then made ancillary moves on top of that, bring in Mike Conley, getting rid of D'Angelo Russell. Are you on the clock with Anthony Edwards? Again, he will sign the extension and you will have team control over him probably for at least, unless he's going to sign the 4-year deal. It'll probably be a 5-year deal, player option. So 4 years under team control on top of next year. So that's 5. But just could things get weird there? but I think the sort of the off quirky one, maybe LaMelo Ball shouldn't qualify for this. I would just watch LaMelo Ball's future in Charlotte at this point, because that team does sort of feel like it's a little bit on the fast track to nowhere. I don't really have anybody after that. You're not going to disenchant anyone in with the Clippers if their season disappoints. I don't really think is LeBron going to request a trade after this year with the Lakers. You're always just under pressure by virtue of the Lakers. You could argue that the Celtics are under pressure with Jaylen Brown. I don't know what else they could do to make him want to stay. If it's an issue if he hasn't been treated properly, then yeah, sure. But if it's a basketball thing, you're not going to elevate him above Jason Tatum, or who are you moving to make Jaylen Brown's role more prominent? He's the number 2 on one of the 3 best teams in the league. That's a big deal. Finally, I also think that Joel Embiid just has to be circled here. And I think it will hinge on James Harden's free agency. But even if James Harden stays and you flame out in the playoffs this season, he loves Philly. Embiid does. But do things start getting weird there? But looking at the more imminent issues, I hate to have it be the same names, but Bradley Beal and Damian Lillard feel most urgent. I think LaMelo Ball needs to be thrown up there a little bit. Luka Doncic, of course. And then I'll Embiid, I guess, gets an honorary mention because it does depend on James Harden's free agency a little bit. Other than that, Trey Young. Yeah, let me pick one, and it can't be Damian Lillard or Bradley Beal. Let's just stick with the LaMelo Ball stuff. That just feels like a situation that could deteriorate and get weird. Even though, again, I believe he will sign the extension. So I'm just going with that. No rhyme or reason to it other than I don't trust the Hornets future. HP Burgie, if the Jazz get Wembanyama with the Timberwolves pick, where's the nearest bridge at least 4 stories above water? This isn't funny. I'm actually not going to mention what happened, but I'm not going to answer this question that is hysterical. I can understand why Timberwolves fans are incredibly nervous about what's going to happen with their pick. Should it be in the lottery and the Jazz get to keep it? Look, if the Jazz end up with Wembanyama, like, holy fuck, that just what already looks like a home run trade for them becomes one of the best trades in NBA history, assuming that Victor Wembanyama is even 45% of the player that people think he's going to be. Man, this year's lottery is going to be wild. We do have a question that's related to this to dovetail with from Herb Jones Enjoyer. If the Jazz, wrong one. But my question is, if you haven't answered this already, which team do you prefer Victor Wembanyama goes to? Here's the thing. We've been asked this question. I've given it different levels of thought, and I feel like my top 1 or 2 answers have changed every time I've done it. So I did think about this one a little bit more this time, and I was trying to figure out, do I want Victor Wembanyama to go somewhere where it's, okay, let's just say the Pelicans are in the lottery, and he ends up on the Pelicans. The idea of him on a team that can be so good immediately is super enthralling. But a really, really, really big part of me wants to see him on a team where he's just going to be unleashed from the jump. And so if Dallas all of a sudden won the lottery after missing the play-in, yeah, that'd be cool. But, like, are they going to give Victor Wembanyama the learning curve that he warrants? Are they going to give him the role prominence on offense that he deserves? Maybe early on, yeah, there's connective stuff. You want to be more of a play finisher, but you don't want his spotlight to be, or his usage to be, cannibalized into that fully. And I think I lean towards the latter, where I'd like to see him on, yes, a team that has at least one other higher profile guy, but I want that team to just unleash him. And it's going to be the Wembanyama show, just to really plumb the depths of what he can do. And so the teams that stand out to me, I will say, I don't really want him in Houston just because I have no idea what the fuck they're doing. And I do think that they would unleash him, even though they have all this sort of mishmash of talent. But I don't want him in Houston. That's just, I don't understand the Rockets' direction. I'm not trying to criticize there. This is going to sound, I guess, kind of shitty. Portland would be interesting, but they're like a franchise that's addicted to not making big swings. And so I'd be curious to see the Damian Lillard, Victor Wembanyama partnership. That's not the one that I need to see or think would necessarily be, is that the best situation for Victor Wembanyama? The two, I have 3. And maybe I guess it could be 4. I just don't view Utah as a legitimate destination. Yeah, they might have 2 lotto picks, but their odds are going to be so, like, bleh. But Utah would be a fun long shot. So I will rank them here. I think 4 is Utah, just because they have Larry Markkinen. They have a bunch of guards. They play very spacey lineups. Walker Kessler at the 5. That could be set up incredibly well for Wembanyama, just because Larry Markkinen's your best player, and he's even more of just I don't want to say a play finisher, but he's not ball dominant. I'm vaulting the Jazz up here. So Charlotte's going to be number 4. I want to see him play. I just said I don't trust the Hornets, but I want to see him play with LaMelo Ball. And I think just even if you keep PJ Washington there, you're not going to see his usage get cannibalized. And so that would be a very interesting partnership for me. Number 3 is going to be San Antonio. He will be fully unleashed there. They have, Trey Jones, their starting point guard, hitting free agency this year, by the way. He could do some nice things, but not going to eat into your touches. And then Vassell, Keldon Johnson, even Jeremy Sohan, who I'm in love with. What a rookie season from Sohan. They're not these tier 1 ball handler from scratch scorer types. I think probably Devin Vassell or Sohan has the best chance of getting there. So you come in and you kind of have this B to B plus building block talent around him, and there's just this A plus guy in Victor Wembanyama you're building everything around. There's a case to vault them higher. I really do believe Utah's going to come in at 2. I just love I'm giving them the bump because they might have 2 lottery picks, and so I think it's fair to include them here. And why did I stop at 4? I don't know. I mean, if I want to throw a 5th one in there, Oklahoma City would be super fun. I haven't gotten to my number 1 spot, by the way, for anyone who's following along here. I know a lot of people said Orlando, but I'm just kind of like, they have Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. Not that I think Wembanyama would get lost in the shuffle. I need to see the right amount of unleashed from him. I think OKC would be an even better fit. We've seen progress from Giddey playing off Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You had Chet Holmgren there with Victor Wembanyama and Jalen Williams. Holy shit. That would be just like the other talent around, like having Kendrick Williams there. Isaiah Joe, if his 3-pointer starts falling again consistently. Ousmane Dieng, who everyone here listens to this podcast knows I'm very high on. It's like that team would be fun. The Pelicans again would be fun, but my number 1 spot, and it does blend. It's with apologies to Detroit. I guess that would be another fun one, but I need him to be on a team that's going to generate him more space. But the Cade Cunningham, Victor Wembanyama duo would be fun. Even throw Jaden Ivey in there as a trio with Jalen Duren. That's a nice little baseline. There's so many intriguing spots. I don't want to see him in Dallas. I'll be quite honest with you. I want to see him in Indy. Tyrese Halliburton, Victor Wembanyama, and Miles Turner. Those are 3 players who just elevate each other and just work so well off of one another. I think Indiana, final answer, would be my favorite destination for Victor Wembanyama. There's a bunch. All the teams that I listed, I'd want to see him. Though if I was going with the 5 that I'm most curious about, maybe even 6, kind of want to see him in Detroit with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. So OKC, so those are my honorable mentions. But Utah 1, Indiana 1, Utah 2, number 3 is going to be San Antonio, and then 4 is Charlotte. This next question comes from Bauer. If you could guarantee perfect health for one player this playoffs, who would you pick and why? Which team would you pick? So I'm guessing I'm applying this to the same team question. I mean, if I could guarantee perfect health from one player this playoffs, I go with Zion Williamson. I guess that sort of presupposes the Pelicans make the playoffs, and so we're getting into just all sorts of a rabbit hole there. So aside from Zion, but I'm going to say Zion. Like that would be if even if New Orleans has to get there by way of the plan. Let's go with Zion. If I wanted to be along the same lines and kind of cheat here, Chet Holmgren in Oklahoma City would be great, but they wouldn't play him anyway, even if he was fully healthy. I think I would want to go with Harden or Embiid just to say like, hey, no excuses here. Embiid's always banged up in the playoffs. I might even want to, just because Harden's dealt with hamstring and Achilles shit the past couple of years, I might want to say him. I think that's the player I'm going with, which is weird because we see him playing games, but I don't want there to be any excuses. And I want to see and I'll pick the Sixers as a team. I want to see what they kind of look like, excuse-free. Joel Embiid's not banged up. He's as healthy as he is at his peak. And just what does that team look like? Can you win a championship with sort of your big man as your best player? That's not something that we've seen a ton of over the past, I don't know, a couple decades at this point, how far we're going back. And whatever you consider Giannis, I don't consider him a big or a wing. He's fucking Giannis, but you get my point there. And so I think that's the team. But it would be Zion. So it's Zion or the Sixers as the team, but their stars specifically. And I'll single out just because has Joel Embiid been just looking at the way they're playing healthier than James Harden, even though they both been dealing with stuff. Yeah. They're like the Achilles thing with James Harden scares me. So I'll go with that. That's a fun question to sort of think about though, but also a reminder of how much injuries suck. I did not mention the Clippers. That might make people mad. Should Paul George be on that list? I didn't mention the Bulls, but if Lonzo Ball was fully healthy, I want to see everyone healthy. I'm very equal opportunity, be fully healthy, please. T Bloom 117 asks, is there a chance that Mikal Bridges can win most improved player this year based off his performance since the trade deadline. And anyone who's not been paying attention to Mikal Bridges since the trade deadline, you have been missing out. He's averaging 27.4 points, 2.8 assists, hitting over 50% of his twos, shooting almost 40% from three on 7 attempts per game, averaging 7 free throw attempts per game, while still hitting them at a 90% clip. I think his defense has probably slipped, but like he's still good enough to just be, hey, like, yeah, he's a really good wing/perimeter defender. Can he win most improved player? I think what helps his case, I will say, is there was this functional turn before he ever left Phoenix. You know, a slow start, injury to Chris Paul, injuries to Devin Booker, topsy-turvy shit from DeAndre Ayton. And so all that inconsistency had the Suns relying on him more as this on-ball creator. And then he goes to Brooklyn and just explodes from it. And it's a large enough sample size to where you say, okay, it's been more than a quarter of the season in Brooklyn, the third of the season in Brooklyn, or whatever it ends up being. And we saw the turn come in Phoenix. Yeah, he could be a candidate, but should he finish on some people's ballots? He might finish top 3, since that goes 3 deep on my ballot. I just feel like most people have kind of assumed that the award is going to Lauri Markkanen. I don't know if I agree with that when Shai Gilgeous-Alexander going from just sort of young, burgeoning star to an MVP candidate. That is a harder leap to make, in my humble opinion. Maybe that's not humble to say, but I mean it to be added with some air of humility. I would bet against him probably finishing in the top 3, just because I think a lot of people might gravitate towards even Tyrese Halliburton. Did he play enough? Jalen Brunson or Emmanuel Quickly in New York. Desmond Bane in Memphis. Did he play enough? There are a lot of good candidates here. Shout out to, he might have, if we went like 5 or 7 deep, maybe not 5, but 7, and he never got injured, Hamidou Diallo might have gotten some love for me here. So I don't think he can realistically win, mostly because I think it's really going to be Lauri Markkanen, even if I don't ultimately pick him. But when you look at it, could you say that he's been one of the 3 most improved, meaningfully improved players from the NBA who's not, a sophomore? Just because I think we expect the leap from year 1 to 2, and even sometimes from year 2 to 3, but definitely year 1 to 2. So yeah, I think you could make that argument. And he's just, I think it's absolutely huge what he's doing. I'd like to see more from him as a passer, but the Nets don't necessarily have the requisite talent around him to get that. The fact that he can do so much to drum up the assist numbers, but him to set up higher quality shots, I think defenses know like which spots he's trying to get to at this point. But the fact that he's been able to maintain his efficiency on a shot difficulty level that is just by and large way, way higher than what he was doing in Phoenix. You look at just the number of field goals that were coming off assists for him in Phoenix before the trade deadline. It was, the overwhelming number of his baskets are coming off assists. And then since in Brooklyn, more than half of his shots, or almost half of his shots, are going unassisted. That's a really big turn. And I think that having that creation, even if it's mostly for yourself at this point, just opens up the possibility that, hey, do I think he's, a top player on I don't want to say a championship team because that's so few players, but a title contender, sort of that, quaint top 4 team in the conference? I don't know. I might lean towards no, but he certainly looks like he could be the number 2 on that. And so also that's why I kind of alluded to why the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander leap. That looks like a guy who can be the best player in a championship team, just flat out. That's why I think that he deserves more love. I guess he's getting love in most improved player, but I'm just surprised that it feels like Lauri Markkanen's candidacy or victory is fait accompli. Sticking with youngsters, though, this question comes from HB. How many rookies from this class have superstar upside? Paolo and superstar is such a tough thing to define. And I was thinking about this before I came on. I have notes in here. It's how many players deep do you go on this? I have Paolo. Do I still have Jabari Smith Jr. here? I do not. I don't know that he's ever going to become the type of offensive player that warrants it. I have to throw Chet Holmgren in here just because we haven't seen Chet Holmgren yet. And so we can't just say, knowing what he was supposed to be coming into the league, we can't rule that out just now. I don't know how great it is. He's missing his first full season, but Ben Simmons was borderline superstar after, he missed a full season. Granted, that fell off. I'm just saying that would be an example. Does Jalen Williams deserve to be here? I don't know that I see it in terms of just like this deliberate, slowed down version of someone who's going to be his offensive usage and importance to the Thunder is greater than I think people realize. But is he ever going to be the nervous system of anything a team does on a really good team? I, I don't know. I don't want to put a limit on him. I want to make that clear. He's going to finish in top 2 on the Rookie of the Year ballot. Superstars, just we need to make the bar really high. And so I'm looking at, I think Shaedon Sharpe, Jaden Ivey, Paolo, and Chet Holmgren is what I'm going. And you can put Jalen Williams in there, and I won't push back against you. I just think we need to have that bar higher to where I consider, hey, should I even have Shaedon Sharpe in there? You look at some of the shots that he's able to make, what he's able to do with the ball in his hands, and the physical tools that he has. I think he needs to be in there. And so those 4 for sure. And I'm just not going to push back if you want to include Jalen Williams. He's been fantastic this year. But we're talking superstar. And I would say player who has a chance to make an all NBA team, multiple all NBA teams at some point in his career. And I don't know if that's Jalen Williams. I don't. And I don't mean that as an insult. He could end up being like, a Chris Middleton level player where it's just, you're kind of hovering around like the top 30 players in the league. You're not going to make an all NBA team. Maybe you make a couple all-stars. All-stars, not superstar, remember. And I think I'm rolling the dice. Definitely on Chet Holmgren, he hasn't played, but just the mystery box appeal of Jaden Ivey and Shaedon Sharpe. And I do think that Jaden Ivey made some strides kind of after the first third or whatever of the season. And so those would be my 4 picks. I don't mean to denigrate Jalen Williams. I also, Thunder fans, if you're listening, I did pick your other rookie who did not play. I'm just so tantalized by what someone who looks like that can do with the ball in his hands, stretch the floor, and then everything that he's going to be able to do to impact his team on defense. Next question comes from Nikolche Kolev. I hope I didn't butcher that too much at this point. What's the most chaotic West play-in combination? Why is it Lakers, Clips, and Mavs versus Mini? So Lakers, Clips is off the table just based off. And by the time you listen to this might even be outdated. We're recording this late on Thursday night. And so if you're listening to this after Friday, the standings could just look way different. The most chaotic West play-in combinations, though, the Lakers and somebody, of course, doesn't look like the Warriors are going to drop down. That would be pretty chaotic. I'm going to say Lakers Mavs would be chaotic just because it's Luka versus LeBron in the play-in. The Mavs can only get the 10th, though. So the Lakers would have to fall to 9th, which is still it's possible. It's just unlikely unless they lose out at this point. Lakers Pelicans would be really funny to see them in the play-in just because the Pelicans have the right to swap picks with the Lakers. And so it's like you're at that level. It doesn't really kind of matter, but that would be pretty funny. Anthony Davis up against his old team. Is Zion healthy for that one? I guess I don't have a good chaos answer here. It would be the Mavericks versus, I'm going to say the Mavericks versus the Mavs versus Pelicans, and then Lakers versus Timberwolves. If we're talking about that first round of playing games, I think that would be chaotic, where it's like Lakers and Timberwolves, they had these higher expectations, both really miss on it. I think people kind of knew who the Lakers were going to be. The Pelicans had higher expectations, but they've just been so banged up between the time Herb Jones has missed, Brandon Ingram has missed, Zion barely playing as well. And then just to see them go against Luka, where it's just kind of like, does Zion come back for that? And what happens? Do Luka and Kyrie really lose to a team that is missing what is a top 10 NBA player if Zion's not playing? I think those are my picks, and that would bounce the Thunder from the play-in. And I really want to see the Thunder in the playoffs. I don't know how conducive they are to chaos. It would be great. It would have been great, to have seen. And I guess it's a lot would need to happen when we're talking about the Clippers dropping down to 9th, which I don't even know if they could do at this point. But seeing the Clippers and the Thunder have to meet in the play-in would have been pretty funny. I just, based on the scenarios here, we're looking at the 5 teams that I think wind up in the play-in. The Warriors really do control their own. A few of these teams control their own destiny. And getting into the playoff scenarios, I will trip over my words. I had to write about it on Wednesday night. I'm just going to say Lakers versus Timberwolves would be kind of pure, like Anthony Davis going up against Towns and Gobert, Jared Vanderbilt playing against his former team, or do the Lakers have the ability to make the Wolves go small? Do the Wolves want to go small? Are their bigs too slight when you look at Davis and Jared Vanderbilt to hang up against that? Anthony Edwards kind of going up against the Lakers rotating cast of just guys who they're trying to stop on the perimeter. Jared Vanderbilt having to guard Anthony Edwards a ton. We know that's going to happen. So Lakers, Timberwolves, and then Pelicans, Mavericks, maybe even Thunder, Mavericks. I guess you just have to put the Mavericks in there even though I don't want to. I would rather watch Thunder Pelicans at this point. I find the Mavs to be a relatively joyless watch at the moment. Next question comes from Everything Blacks. Ooh, this is topical. What's your take on the Nick Nurse situation in Toronto? He was awfully candid when speaking about his future. Yeah, that was weird. I definitely do appreciate the candor from him. And as he mentioned, he's kind of been there for 10 years. And yes, it feels like a lifetime ago since he won that title. The Raptors have undergone many changes. We had the pandemic. We had that season in Tampa. There are a lot more challenges, societal challenges, when you're looking at life being day-to-day life being impacted more in Canada than it was here in the States. You could argue that Canada was just much safer about it, which would be a good thing. But I could see that taking a really big emotional strain. And as you mentioned, he's been with the franchise for 10 years. This season, the Raptors have been one of the bigger underachievers, which is still kind of weird, though, is that they have a chance. Like they're going to hover around the top 10 in both offense and defense, and then throw net rating in there. They have the 10th best net rating right now. That's at 500. That's definitely some blowouts have skewed that, but that's just a weird thing to say. They're very top heavy. Is he just sort of exhausted with the model roster they've tried to build, how top heavy it's been, not being able to explore depth? Is that on him at all? Have they varied up their defense enough? I also think this is just sort of like, it's like when you ask it, I'll use the marathon runner as an example. It's almost asking a marathon runner at mile 25 if they're going to run another marathon next year. They're almost done. It's been exhausting. You're probably not thinking about it. It's why I've never understood why people, and when I was younger, I used to get up in arms where you ask, let's say I loved the Marvel superhero movies. You're asking Tom Holland after he did 4 Spider-Man movies, immediately after he's done filming, spent all this time in Spider-Man movies. Are you going to play Spider-Man another 3 movies or something? They're kind of just exhausted. So in that moment, so close to it that they actually haven't had the time to reflect. And then I also feel like, did they just catch Nick Nurse at a moment of not weakness, but where his guard was just down, and he's had some strain within the organization, his relationship maybe with Masai Ujiri, difference of opinions when it comes to roster construction and vision. And you just kind of caught him at an exhausted moment. And with the Raptors kind of going through this, it's this season where they were never out of it enough to choose the direction of, well, maybe they should be a tanker. They've never been in it enough, even though they made the Jakob Poeltl trade, to kind of know where they stand. And so it's just been sort of this stop and start dead sprint all season. So I could see him being exhausted, but the fact that he said it does make me think that this organization is maybe approaching a crossroads with him. Also, could it just be, hey, I want a new fucking contract? Could this be his way of saying that? It could have been that too. But the Raptors have a lot of decisions to make. So it just wouldn't shock me if everyone sort of involved is looking to take a step back. Fred VanVleet, player option. Gary Trent Jr., player option. Jakob Poeltl, free agent. Precious Achiuwa, extension eligible. OG Anunoby, extension eligible. Would he even sign one based on the new extension rules? I don't know if they get him there. Pascal Siakam, extension eligible. They're getting to a point where they have to like kind of double and triple down on this core that is going to win 41, 42 games for the year, maybe not even make it out of the play-in. I could see everyone involved being exhausted, needing some time to just take a step back. I appreciate the candor, but I could also very much see this being, aside from, hey, we caught Nick Nurse with his guard down. This season has been trying. He's been here for forever. Maybe he's looking for a change of pace, and maybe there are difference of opinions that we don't know about behind the scenes right now. I can just also very much see it being, sign me to a fucking contract. And so let's not discount that possibility either. Two more questions. Oh, wow. 3 more questions. Unbiased Pistons fan. What team would be the best if the NBA changed to a 3 versus 3 league? What team would be the worst? Answering what team would be the worst is really, really hard for me. Because I think it would it'd probably be Houston or San Antonio, like looking at the half court talent there. I also, with these 3v3 rules, are we still playing full court or is it half court? If it's half court, as a best team, are the Mavericks just in there because you don't have to worry about, like, we're talking about teams needing to clear it. So kind of going one way and then turning around. So Luka's transition defense isn't as damaging. I think what would be the best team, and I feel pretty bullish about this after thinking about it, would be the Cleveland Cavaliers. Just the 3 players that they could pick, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, and Darius Garland. Like, is there just a better combination for 3v3? Whether you need to play full court, whether we're playing half court, I think that would be the best team. I'm sure some would gravitate towards LeBron, AD, and what they say, D'Lo or Jared Vanderbilt, you could definitely come up with a Clippers combination and Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Terrence Mann would probably be my third. Golden State, you have Draymond, Clay, and Steph. Okay, maybe. But Cleveland just has the shot making ability from Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Donovan Mitchell's gotten a lot better defensively this year, just the defensive everything of Evan Mobley. So he still gives you some size, but he can guard anyone on the perimeter and contest a ton of shots. He can work as just a play finisher as well. And the ground that he's able to cover is going to help you no matter the style we're playing here, full court or half court. Interesting question. I'm pretty bullish on Cleveland though, which probably means it's the wrong answer since they came to me pretty quickly there. Second to last question comes from Kai Rinker. What four, so power forward, are you targeting if you're the Pacers? Young and can grow with the team, or overpaid vet like Tobias Harris for 1 to 2 years? Love this question on the Pacers. I don't know enough about the draft to go into. I think they could go both routes. I will get into what I would do. But if you want them to go the younger route and you want to focus on it in the draft, I haven't done my draft prep work yet. I'm not going to include those names. I would go from someone who straddles the line, I guess, is that's such a cop-out. I wouldn't be like, hey, let's go all in on like what is a veteran power forward here. Like, let's go all in on a Harrison Barnes, or even I like Jeremy Grant for them and they have cap space, but it wouldn't be, hey, let's go all in on Jeremy Grant. I wouldn't skew that far unless it was a mega, like Giannis becomes available. Yeah, you go after Giannis. I also would say someone like OG Anunoby makes a lot of sense if you want to try and play Mikal at the 4, even though he's more of a 3. I don't see the Pacers giving up enough to ever be involved in those discussions. They might have it if you put Benedict Mathurin in this year's pick on the table. Those are assets that can get you into those discussions. I just don't see them doing it. And so that's why I disqualified them. I think my ideal 2 for this team would be PJ Washington. He's a restricted free agent. We've seen him really branch out his offensive horizons this year. He can handle some pretty tough defensive assignments. On offense, he can operate from the nail. He can pick and pop. He can kind of roll. He can attack from the outside in. Love his fit next to Miles Turner. Patrick Williams in Chicago, just being extension eligible, showing some more moxie when he's coming off the bench. Is he higher volume enough? Maybe the Pacers don't care as much about that, but when you're playing with alongside someone in Tyrese Halliburton, who I think just uplifts his opponents more than a DeMar DeRozan, his teammates, more than a DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine when you're looking at primary playmaking, that would go a long way. So those are 2. Other names that spring to mind, anyone who listens to this podcast knows I love John Collins on this team. And then Obi Toppin, showing a lot of flashes since Julius Randle's been injured in New York. He's extension eligible. Are they willing to move him for some low first round equity just to have another asset in the chamber rather than deal with, oh, we might have to pay him, and then what is his value going to be on the trade market, or how much do we ultimately use him? And so the 4 names then, John Collins, PJ Washington, Patrick Williams, and Obi Toppin. Now, if I could pick the perfect one, it's probably between Patrick Williams and PJ Washington. I feel like investing in PJ Washington could be difficult, but there's a dice roll there. I also kind of feel like, is there a chance Patrick Williams becomes more expensive because of the bandwidth that he has on defense in theory? I think PJ Washington, he's just clearly the more impactful player at this point. If you are more concerned about your defense and you want someone who can also play the 3, then sure. But if we're looking at strictly a 4, I'd go PJ Washington. I'm very tempted to go John Collins, but that's a big rehabilitation project. And then you're getting into it for another 3 years. With PJ Washington, he has 4 years, but he's a little bit younger. And like I said, he's shown the ability to do more on offense. So that's the ideal one. But I wouldn't, again, Patrick Williams, Obi Toppin, John Collins, I think are all fantastic options for that team. This next question comes from Usher, and it's 2 questions. One's a joke question, but which current NBA player is most likely to be in an exhibition boxing MMA fight, and why is it Draymond Green? The one thing I will say here, not to think about this too much, is Draymond Green doesn't seem like someone who's just going to do something post-career for spectacle. That feels more like a Dylan Brooks or Patrick Beverley move, where Draymond Green just might immerse himself in media. He's not going to need to go to these novel avenues or departments to really keep himself relevant, let's say, post-playing career. And even he's not someone who's going to do it in the offseason. I could just see like Dylan Brooks or Patrick Beverley deciding in the offseason without having retired or anything yet, going about that. And so I think those would be my picks. Steven Adams was mentioned in Discord. I could probably see it, but he just seems like too chill and wants to fly under the radar to have done it. If he did it, he'd be like in the backyard in like this dirt pick, and he'd be doing it with like a fucking grizzly bear or a rhino is what he would be facing. The actual question from Usher says, my real question is, if Ayton has a really good playoffs, especially if it leads to a championship, is it more likely that the Suns keep him as part of their core since it led to playoff success, or does it increase the likelihood he gets traded since it would likely raise his trade value significantly? Love the show as always. Hey, thank you, Usher. I never tire of hearing compliments. If surprise, surprise, even though they can sometimes make me awkward if I receive them in public. When it's just me sitting in front of the camera, love it. And also in Discord when you guys give it. Thank you for the compliments we got on that Keith Smith interview. If you haven't checked it out, broke down the entire CBA, the implications, a lot of fun. I would say it's a hard no for me that the Suns would trade Ayton if they won the title and he played well. If he played poorly during the title run and they viewed it as, hey, we had to carry him, they would be more likely to me, hey, we win a title, Chris Paul plays well, like we're still going to look to move on from him anyway because of his age. What I do think is interesting, this gets into a larger discussion about DeAndre Ayton, is will he find his groove with this new era of the Suns? David, he's at the 4-point play for his in Roman numerals at the 4-point play on Twitter, had a great thread about how Ayton is spending more time in the dunker spot during with KD on the court. When I was going back and doing this, which was actually before half of it was done before I saw that thread. And then I did some more after that thread. Watching back a lot of the plays. Yeah. Like he was around the basketball, around the dunker spot more with KD on the court. And I think that's the benefit, especially when you have Devin Booker and KD at once, of just having guys who they don't need a ball screen to operate. I still think Chris Paul's at the point where he probably very much needs one if he's not already mismatched against someone bigger and slower. And even then, he might just still prefer a ball screen. So there's the real benefit of there. And he's suited to do that role because we know he's going to bail out if you ask him to do stuff higher. And have noticed watching and then going back and watching a bunch of stuff, and some of it's finicky when you're looking at the data. Like before March 1st, which was KD's debut, DeAndre Ayton was averaging 4.4 post-ups per game. Since then, he's at 2.4. KD missed a bunch of time during that span, though. And since KD came back the second time, his post-ups are actually kind of closer to 4.4 than they are to 2.4. Before March 1st, 37.7% of his shots were coming inside the restricted area. Since KD's first debut, they're at 30.3%, and his mid-range volume overall has gone up from 20. It's at like 24-25% of his shots. And it was at like 19-20 before the KD trade. Now, since KD's second return, which has been 4 games, that's down to 17%. And so like it's evidence he's getting the basket more. We've seen more of his shots come in the restricted area. I don't know though, if he's definitely going to find his offensive niche here. And I'm not saying he strikes me now as someone who's been paid and will want more functionally, but I could just see when you need him to be a play finisher, you're going to need him to do other things other than hang around in the dunker spot to get those attempts where if he bails out or is going to go up a little softer, it's not as damaging because they're not jumpers or hooks that he's using. They're at least like closer to the basket, even when he's kind of bailing out and taking jumpers around that spot. And as David mentioned in his thread, we've all bemoaned how few free throws he attempts. That's a way for his free throw attempts to go up. And so I need to see more of that. But I do just question, because when you watch him, and I think what surprised me is when I went back and watched, a lot of this stuff was when Kevin Durant was on the court versus when he was off the court. He seems hesitant more than ever to put the ball on the floor, where he's going to, if he catches it, he's not going to, after he's screening, like he's not it feels like he's been behind a lot of the screens where it's like Chris Paul's looking for him and he's not yet where he's supposed to be on the roll or even the pop. And it feels like he's bailing out. He's catching the ball, stopping, firing. He's not doing a bunch of dribble moves. We're seeing more, if he's on the run, like he's kind of just throwing it up, push shots, or turning what could be 1-2 dribble touches to the basket into just these little mid-range baby jumpers. And that's just weird to me. And when KD's not on the court and it's one of Booker and Paul or both of them, it does feel like he's more inclined to attack off the dribble, where there's still a lot of settling though. And I don't know if that's just something that I'm wrong about. Like I didn't watch enough of him, but the bailout stuff still very much matters to me. And so if he is going to spend ample more time around the dunker spot, and he's not going to need to come up, set all these screens, that will make his life easier. I just question, is that something he either gets bored with? Is he going to want more? Do they get to a point where they're going to trust him to, even do more? Then Chris Paul is getting up there in age. You're going to stagger Kevin Durant from Devin Booker. There's going to be opportunities for him to do more. He just seems more reluctant to do more. So I'm talking about, will he be unhappy doing quote unquote less? I honestly, I don't know. But what I will say is super promising here is I've loved what I've seen defensively from the Kevin Durant, DeAndre Ayton front court. On Ayton specifically, since the trade deadline, opponents shooting 53.3% against him at the rim. That is just that's an elite mark. And it's since the KD trade. So it's before the trade deadline, actually, a whopping second before the trade deadline. It's not coming on huge volume, under 5 attempts contested at the basket per game, but he's been massive there. Now you add KD to the equation, whose defense I missed on at the beginning of the season in Brooklyn. I said people were kind of overstating it. He's had a really good defensive year. When he and DeAndre Ayton are on the floor, and almost 2/3 of Kevin Durant's minutes have come with DeAndre Ayton on the floor. So these two are playing together a lot. 22.8% of opponent shots are coming at the rim. That's in the 100th percentile. And they're shooting 60.4% at the rim against the Suns. That's in the 96th percentile. The Suns on the season allow 32.6% of their opponent shots at the rim, and they will hit them at a 65.3% clip. So we're talking about drastic differences here. I could see that front line being very successful defensively. And when your fifth wheel is going to be either Josh Okogie or Torrey Craig a lot of the time, certain matchups might be iffy, but that just top unit, the Suns are built to just steamroll during those minutes. And that's why sometimes I wonder if we're overthinking it and we should just call the Suns title favorites. The health questions or whatever, but we could say that about every team. This team is riskier. You're stepping out on a limb more than many others. But when their ceiling is just so high, I really do think we're overthinking it. And that if they had gone through, if this had happened, let's say before the All-Star break, and we trusted that they got a few practices under their belt, or even let's say that Kevin Durant never got injured, that they didn't acquire, let's say they acquired him injured, but he never gets injured the second time and misses 10 games, whatever it was. I think we're at the point where it's probably just hey, the Suns are title favorites and we're overthinking this. But because he missed some time, because they haven't had a ton of time together, because the offense it doesn't always look right. And the stuff I said with Ayton is part of it. The last 4 games, and thank you, David, to alerting us all to it. Go check out that thread. I retweeted it on my feed. It's important that he's doing that. Will it last in the postseason when he's going to have to go up against more difficult defenses, and when the bigs that are going to be around the basket they're going to do more to at least change his shot. He's just surrounded by so much talent. He's going to get a lot of opportunities, but will he go up physical enough when there are more demonstrative contests? I question whether DeAndre Ayton is going to flourish with the Suns under this structure offensively. I mean, defensively, as long as he's engaged, it's going to be a rousing success during the minutes he's with KD. We'll see if they have enough depth when we're projecting forward. The moral of the story is I do not think that they're going to move him unless this season ends poorly and he was part of it. And then that's when we start getting into to trades. And I don't really want to get into prospective suitors, but if we were looking at what's a team that I think could maximize DeAndre Ayton the most with what we want to see from him, I think it's probably San Antonio. And not just because of the absence of a center there, but looking at the talent around him and the way they like to play right now. But I would like to see, there's going to be more basket pressure if he's hanging around the dunker spot. I need to see more of what's happening though when he is going to come out and set screens, or he's playing from the outside in. And it also kind of feels like he's not, they're going to need him to make passes out of a short roll or a full roll, however you want to frame it. Like when you have, if KD's going to be in the corner, KD's actually allowed to hit corner threes now. He's in Phoenix. That's incredible. Is DeAndre Ayton going to be able to find him more? They might need him to make not more complicated decisions, but those are decisions that, rather than him sort of bailing out for a jump hook or a fade or just a stop and pop midi, short midi, whatever you want to call it, can you get all the way to the basket, especially now that you're working with so much space and just so much proven scores around with just having Devin Booker and Kevin Durant on just either side of you. Holy fuck. Imagine what that does to defenses. I want to see more of that from him. I think having him closer to the basket to begin with, and that's something that having KD alone helps you with, but also Devin Booker as well. That's going to, I think I can see how it would help DeAndre Ayton, especially David mentioned this in his thread too, against certain playoff opponents. But I think long-term and just overall, you need a little bit more oomph from him. And when he's had to play higher on offense in the half court during the Kevin Durant minutes, and even during the non-Durant minutes, the bailouts are still there. It just doesn't feel like that is necessarily clicking yet. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. I think this team's going to be really fucking good. They're already really fucking good, and I don't think they've hit their peak yet. I hope everyone enjoyed this show. As always, please just remember to subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Cross-subscribe, tell people about us. That goes a long way. And hey, join our Discord. We have room for more people in there. The discussions are always fun. Everyone who goes the extra mile and joins Discord, we very much appreciate you. Until next time, Grant and I will be back next week, probably after the season ends, with our All-NBA and awards picks. We decided to wait. He wasn't able to go this week. We didn't want to do it last week. Like I said, there was still just so much going on. But we will have those rolling out, so you can feel free to get mad. I already submitted mine for Bleacher Report. I'm not sure I'm going to make any tweaks to them. I will say Defensive Player of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, and MVP, and then the All-NBA teams have bent my brain. I digress. Until next time, I leave you with the shout-out, as always, to the one, the only, Frank Ntilikina. And also, as ever, apologies to Jared Allen.